Chapter 17, Breathing and Exchange of Gases Points Wise. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cells and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. The process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hands on your chest. You can feel that the chest moving up and down. You know that it is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing are described in the following sections of this chapter. Respiratory organs. Mechanisms of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending mainly on their habitats and levels of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelentrates, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tubes, tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. Special vascularized structures called gills, bronchial respiration, are used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas vascularized bags called lungs, pulmonary respiration, are used by the terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frogs can respire through their moist skin, cutaneous respiration also. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lips. It leads to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into the pharynx, a portion of which is the common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchiole gives rise to a number of very thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structures called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprise the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double-layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The parts starting with the external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their ducts form the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. The connecting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies and also brings the air to body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lung pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps. 1. Breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. 2. Diffusion of gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. 3. Transport of gases by the blood. 4. Diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. 5. Utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of carbon dioxide. Cellular respiration as dealt in the chapter 14. Mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two stages. Inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure with the lungs, intra-pulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. That is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intra-pulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostals between the ribs, help in generation of such gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the antero-posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscles lifts up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume. An increase in pulmonary volume decreases in the intra-pulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs. That is inspiration. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal positions and reduces the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. This leads to an increase in intra-pulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Respiratory volumes and capacities. 1. Tidal volume TV. Volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. It is approximately 500 milliliter. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6000 to 8000 milliliter of air per minute. Inspiratory reserve volume IRV. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forcible inspiration. This averages 2500 milliliter to 3000 milliliter. Expiratory reserve volume ERV. Additional volume of air a person can expire by a forcible expiration. This averages 1000 milliliter to 1100 milliliter. Residual volume RV. Volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 milliliter to 1200 milliliter. By adding up a few respiratory volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities which can be used in clinical diagnosis. Inspiratory capacity IC. Total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume TV plus IRV. Expiratory capacity EC. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume TV plus ERV. Functional residual capacity FRC. Volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This includes ERV plus RV. Vital capacity VC. The maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. This includes ERV, TV and IRV, or the maximum volume of air a person can breathe out after a forced inspiration. Next one, total lung capacity TLC. Total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of a forced inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TV and IRV or vital capacity plus residual volume. Exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on pressure or concentration gradient. Solubility of the gases as well as the thickness of the membranes involved in diffusion are also some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressures of these two gases in the atmospheric air and the two sides of diffusion are given in table 17.1 and in figure 17.3. The data given in the table clearly indicates a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissues. Here table 17.1, partial pressures in millimeter Hg of oxygen and carbon dioxide at different parts involved in diffusion in comparison to those in atmosphere. Respiratory gas oxygen atmospheric air is 159 and alveoli is 104 and blood deoxygenated is 40 and blood which is oxygenated is 95 and tissues is 40. The respiratory gas carbon dioxide atmospheric air is 0.3 and alveoli is 40, blood which is oxygenated is deoxygenated is 45 and the blood which is oxygenated is 40 and the tissues is 45.